I may assume that we are all very familiar with them and their works. I would like to thank the speakers very much for the willingness to join us today, for the valuable time and their presence. And I would like to thank Ibu Daru very much for supporting us on this special event. Last but not least, thank you very much, Maya, Alit, Galuch, Rian, Deborah, Wilton, Linda, Isabella, everyone supporting us tonight. I wish us all a very inspiring evening. And before I finish, I just remember that I should say, please remain from eating in the room and from taking flashlights. But that's it. So have all an amazing night. And yeah, looking forward to hear the positions we are about to hear. Thank you very much.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Ingo, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Daru, and I would like to thank STF Driyarkara and also Goethe-Institut for having me tonight as a moderator, talking about this very necessary topic that we need to discuss tonight. It's pretty long. Let me take a look. On law, politics, and religion, Kantian strengths, limits, and practices within Indonesia and global context. It is very necessary because, let's admit it, facing 2024, we all have this anxiety of facing the election year because the terminology democracy party that we always use to practice our right to vote does not really sound as festive as it is. So how come Kant is pretty much relevant for this one? Of course, when we are aiming for that similar universal goal that society everywhere has, which is moving towards the ideal society that Kant is talking about, we are still questioning whether we have that in Indonesia or not. And then do we still have that concept of cosmopolitan, of seeing each individual that we have in Indonesia coming from diverse ethnicity background, religion, towards our one goal, which is to realize the realization of social injustice of all people in Indonesia. Now, to discuss further, of course, we have two speakers right over here, Professor Dr. Matthias, hang on, let me take a look. Professor Dr. Matthias Lutz-Bachmann, and also our very own Professor Dr. Franz Magnis-Suseno. The first speaker will be Professor Bachmann, and the second one will be Professor Franz Magnis-Suseno. And we will have the question and answer at the end of both presentations. So for those who are excited to ask and have a discussion with the speakers, let's have that at the end of both presentations. I will introduce the first speaker, which is Professor Lutz-Bachmann, who will be here with us virtually. So Professor Dr. Matthias Lutz-Bachmann is a German philosopher and professor who has been teaching and researching at the Institute for Philosophy at the University of Frankfurt since 1994. And his focus are medieval philosophy, practical philosophy, with particular attention to political philosophy and ethics, philosophy of religion, and critical theory. In the academic world, some of his achievements are Dean of Department of Philosophy and History at University of Frankfurt. That was from 2007 until 2009. An elected member of the Philosophy Review Board of the German Research Foundation. That was between 2004 until 2008. The vice president of the Johann Wolfgang Goethe University in Frankfurt, Maine, with special responsibility for research and for the humanities and cultural studies. That was between 2009 until 2015. Tonight, the topic that he will present is Peace Through Law on the Strengths and Limits of Kant's Political Philosophy. Without further ado, please give an applause for Professor Lutz-Bachmann.
Thank you so much for having invited me to participate in your important and, let me say, wonderful organized conference. It is today the day of birth, which was given to the philosopher Immanuel Kant 300 years ago. And in order to start with our topic, I would point at the fact that Kant was born in a time when, according to his own language, everywhere political regimes have been still despotic and not yet transformed into republican public legal orders. And the same was true and for the time of Kant, and I regret to say it is still the reality of today, that there is almost no binding legal order among states in the international sphere, in the dimension of politics worldwide. And that situation has partly changed, like the despotic state of so many states has already changed in several cases, in others not without the influence of Kant's political philosophy. Kant is important for us as a thinker who prepared ourselves and political theory, legal theory, and philosophy for a difference of political systems, from despotism to republicanism, from the anarchy of states to a peaceful membership of states in an international order. These are the main topics and issues of his philosophy. And so we are celebrating the memory of a great thinker who can give us important insight, even for us, for you, probably, and hopefully, as he is important for the discussion in Europe, and especially has been important for the democratic development of Germany in the last 80 years. And what is common to his political main topic and issue of republicanism and legal state among states, this is the basic idea that the politics of wars should end definitely everywhere. War into single states and political communities, civil wars, as well as war among states. This has been what in his language and is still until now a necessary postulate of human reason. Human reasoning comes out to this result, that a state of war has to be overcome by a state of peace, necessarily, strictly, without any alternative. This is, in a nutshell, the message of Kant. And in my paper, I'd like to give you something like an introduction, why Kant came to these insights and where are the strengths and the probable limits of Kant's own argumentation. This is the question mark in the title of my talk, Peace Through Law. Is that possible? Is that necessary? Is that idea helpful? For my presentation of Kant, I have to cut many specialist questions or questions for which specialists are interested. I have to concentrate from a complex practical philosophy constellation to the main issues. And the main issue of Kant, and this is something we have to discuss later, is concerned with the problem of human freedom. Human freedom, which is not the same like the famous category of autonomy in Kant's practical philosophy. Autonomy is a way to find the maxims of right behavior, but freedom is the postulate Kant is starting with. It's much more basic, and according to him, it's the only innate right. Here is somehow a theory of human rights already present, and he calls it an original or innate right of each individual. In his groundwork into the metaphysics of morals, published in the year 1785, he prepared that argument philosophically by referring to another important insight of his practical philosophy, the insight, namely, that no human being may ever be treated as a pure instrument in the hands of others. This is the basic idea. This is the backside of the same coin of human freedom. Human having this right to freedom as an innate right should never be treated by others as a pure instrument. And Kant gives this definition of a necessary and innate property of humans, the description or the definition of dignity. It's human dignity, which consists in this right never to be treated as a pure instrument by others, never instrumentalized, to say it in another word, in the words of critical theory or Max Horkheimer. This necessity, the necessity for this principle and the postulate is, together with the idea of the innate human rights, the basic assumption from where Kant gives reasons for his political philosophy. That part was somehow the moral philosophy foundation for its political philosophy. The political philosophy has the implication, which is drawn from these two principles of dignity and human right to freedom, that violence among humans is fundamentally forbidden. And the same is true for the second conclusion, that any form of warfare, be it by states or be by private or actors or institutions, is forbidden, since warfare is the organized concept of violence among humans. And violence is violating human dignity and human right to freedom in a very basic way. And that is why violence and warfare are forbidden. The instrument by which Kant intends to overcome the real situation of violent relations we are living with and always confronted with, and the constellation of military threat of war between states we are still confronted with until today. We see the bad example for that in the Ukraine, in Sudan, in Palestine, and in so many places of the world. the instrument to fulfill the moral and political postulate I was speaking about, the instrument Kant is offering is the institution of law. Through law, this is his message. The situation of violence and war should be overcome and transferred into a situation of peace in which human dignity and the basic human rights are respected, are practically present and realized by human activities themselves. Here we encounter, in other words, the program of Kant. I repeat it in the title of my talk. Peace is necessary and is possible can be realized through the introduction of law, or in his own words, through the constitution of what he called a public legal order, not only among individual subjects, in his words, becoming citizens by the political order, but among states as well as free individual bearers of rights in the international arena. But their order has to be analogous to the inner situation of the state, transformed by law into a public, legal, and rightful order of states. But what is the proper definition of law? Law and right are not just an instrument, but have certain conditions or properties according to Kant. And now I quote for the first time out of Kant's writings in translation into English. Right is the sum of the conditions under which human freedom can be united with the freedom of all in accordance with a universal law of freedom. This is, end of quote. This is original tone of Kant's political and here legal. From here, Kant concludes the statement that a correct, rightful system of law is, I quote again, connected with the authorization to use coercion of law by procedures, by civil organizations and controlled structures in a democratic or republican order is a necessary element of law. But this kind of law or use of coercion has to be distinguished from violence as a brutal and spontaneous or organized destruction of the virtue of dignity and human freedom. Human freedom is not destroyed by coercion of law if the law is rightfully constituted in a republican and democratic order. Insofar as the members of such a democratic order are the authors who writes the law and can change law by procedures without violence, by democratic elections and new reflections in the political arena of the public. Impartiality and justice are like strictness and stability, the main characteristics generally spoken for a public order of law. And this, as I said, is, according to Kant, the basic way, the necessary condition in order to constitute peace. Peace not only within a certain civil order, a certain society, by the constitution of a peaceful and law-oriented political structure of the state, but in addition to that thought, in the relation among states as well, and in the relation of the individuals, each of us, against and towards all the states in the world. I come now to this second important point, namely the special question, how international peace can be constituted by this Kantian postulate of an international public order constituted by law. This is an argument we find in his small writing but important text of 1795, Towards Perpetual Peace. Here, Kant demonstrates the topic, is discussing the topic of international peace among states, and here he gives us insight into his political program, how to constitute a non-violent relation among states as a contribution to international peace. Between the single states in the international arena, which is still defined until today by the so-called anarchy of states, a lack of political and legal order. In other words, this lack, this missing element should be, according to Kant, constituted not as the same political structure or legal structure like within the state, by an order of international law and right, which is, according to Kant, to be constituted by different elements and properties. In the first definitive article of his writings, Kant still points out that each state has to transform itself by reform into republican order. The republican order consists, according to him, by the separation of powers, legislation, execution, jurisdiction, by an independent system of jurisdiction, controlling government and the processes in the public, by a system of representation, and the constitution of a legal order, which is constituted by the act of assent of all. And from here, he thinks it is possible to think that all members of a community transform themselves into citizens of a state with certain rights, and being involved in democratic processes, legislation, and public control of the government. But what are the proposals of Kant? This is my decisive question: to constitute a political legal order among states in order to overcome war and to offer an order of peace. Here, Kant gives, according to my reading, a very weak answer. A weak answer where we can see according to my reading of Kant, some limits in Kant's theory. He argues that the old form of the international law, what was called in Latin the jus gentium, the law of the peoples and states, should be, which included the right to warfare for each state as an element of its sovereignty or political autonomy, that system should be overcome in order to guarantee peace by, and this is his final proposal, a free federation of states. The free federation of states is not designed as a world state or a world republic, not a state of the states on the global level, even if Kant does reflect about that possible conclusion out of his principles, but he argues finally that the weaker free federation of states should be organized in a different manner, that free states may become members of that federation or may not become, but if they are members, and when the states are members, Kant expects that the members who joined in that League of Nations will build what he called a permanent Congress of States, and with that instrument of the Congress of States, Kant thinks that these states are able to overcome their conflicts in a way which it does not and never include warfare, but peaceful procedures, assent, or finally jurisdictional decisions. To them, states should be obedient by their own free will. It is a free and not strict legal order. In a way, Kant is not accepting for the republic within a single state, and this is a proposal he makes for the peace structure among states on the international arena. He does present in his so-called third definitive article another additional argument and thought, namely the necessity to constitute a legal sphere of cosmopolitan right. Not only the federation among states, but second, legal order, a constitutional order of cosmopolitan right concerning the individual persons like us towards all states on earth. And this is limited, according to Kant, to the right to hospitality. That means a right to visit foreign countries, which is not a right to settle everywhere for a longer time. Here we can identify something I would like to call the core of a revolutionary idea, much more revolutionary than the idea of the League of States, namely in the postulate of a free right of each individual for human conditions of life and human dignity accepted legally by all states on earth, that we can fear jurisdiction against states if this element of human rights is not accepted by a foreign state. I think this is an interesting thought, but not really fully worked out in Kant's political philosophy, and for that reason, I come to something like the final reflection. We should argue today that we can refer to Kant's philosophy in order to find necessary structures for peace building, namely by the constitution of strict law within states and in the international arena. But for strict law among states, we need a much stronger world organization than the proposed League of Nations or League of States, according to Kant's own writing in the text towards eternal peace. And in addition to that thought, Kant argues in favor of a cosmopolitan right. But who is the author of that right, and how look the institutions to refer to in order to make that claim of right to be strict in the sense Kant is postulating in his philosophy of law. I think even here we have to go farther over Kant towards new institutions of the level of the global conditions of politics in the world today. What we need are institutions, to summarize, which are able to bring not only the idea, but the consequences of a just international legal order into political efficiency. And that means we need institutions strong enough to intervene on a global level in order to avoid constellations of conflict, which end up in military activities and hot wars on the one hand, and we need institutions which are responsible for the right of all individual humans, even against their own states and institutions, but especially against foreign states, to preserve their basic human rights as something which is protected by the institution of law. But this is the final point I make in order to be present in time. In the 30 minutes you asked me to present my thought and my reference to Kant. This is necessary in order to bring forward a structure which is complementary to the Republican revolution and democratization within single states and societies. But we need a mechanism of strength, independence, and sovereign activities of what I would call the international law, which is able to protect peace and to preserve human rights against penetrators and state or private activities. And that is something for which we have no blueprint yet. We have no organization since the UN, the United Nations organization, which started with the imperative of Kant to be responsible for the world peace and to protect each country and the individuals against warfare, and even against activities by which human rights are undermined and attacked. This organization has not yet reached the shape necessary in order to fulfill the imperatives of Kant. But besides this political statement that we need a much more representative and stronger international organization protecting peace and human rights, we need further sources in culture and moral behavior of humans to organize something like a culture of peace within societies and worldwide. A culture of peace is therefore needed, a willingness to make amends in situations of conflict, a morality of forgiveness, of guilt and failure, without which the conflicts of the past and present will never come to an end. Only in a global culture of willingness to forgive can past guilt be acknowledged, and only then we can trust and cooperate with others, be it with other states, be it with other societies, or even individuals globally on Earth. However, such a culture also requires a policy of social equality and economic justice that overcomes the extreme differences in poverty in the world. It also opens a willingness for cosmopolitan hospitality, which gives us hope that Kant's idea of law that binds politics will succeed worldwide, in which human rights are also binding and can be enforced against states and global actors in case of doubt. The normative reasons that Kant presented in his philosophical rationale for peace also apply to these other conditions of the possibility of peace. It is not limited just to the instrument of law. We need a culture of willingness, the goodwill, in other words, of Kant, has to be applied to the conditions of political peace on Earth. What is necessary today, however, in view of the daily growing dangers to peace worldwide, is a new context, acting, thinking in categories of cosmopolitan responsibility that is anchored in Kant's theory, but at the same time goes beyond Kant's political philosophy. It would be the task of such an activity to resolutely build the institutions of a binding public legal order worldwide that are necessary for humanity to finally find its way out of the crude natural state of perpetual wars and enter into a political and civil world order, into what Kant called a true cosmopolitan condition, states and individuals. If we do not achieve this state, which is combined strengths of all men of goodwill, humanity as a whole will remain threatened in its existence. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Right, thank you very much, Professor Lutz-Bachmann. Can we please give another round of applause from him? So that was Peace Through Law on the Strengths and Limits of Kant's Political Philosophy, which I think is also relevant to the situation globally nowadays, where we also have the violation of peace or genocide, if we might say, in the Middle East. Now, before we probably would like to discuss further with Professor Lutz-Bachmann, let's go to the second speaker, our very own Professor Franz Magnis-Suseno. Let me introduce him. Professor Dr. Franz Magnis-Suseno, or as we call Romo Magnis, is a permanent lecturer and professor of social philosophy at the Driyarkara School of Philosophy in Jakarta. He studied philosophy, theology, and political science in Pulau, Yogyakarta, and also in Munich, and obtained his doctorate in philosophy from Universität München, Germany, with a dissertation on Karl Marx. Since 1961, he has lived in Indonesia and becoming an Indonesian citizen and taught at several universities in Jakarta and Bandung. He was also a guest lecturer at the, I'm so sorry for my pronunciation, Goethe-Institut, Universität München, that was in 1979, Philosophische Hochschule München, that was in 1987 and 1992, and the Faculty of Theology, University of Innsbruck in 1987. He received his Doctor Honoris Causa degree in theology from University of Lausanne, Switzerland, that was in 2002. The topic of his presentation tonight is, can Indonesian politics learn something from Kant? Without further ado, please give a round of applause for Romo Magnis.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. and Mississippi's Misters, this year, philosophers world over remember the birthday of the German philosopher Immanuel Kant in Königsberg 300 years ago. In my eyes, Kant is still the most important philosopher of the last 500 years. He's also a fundamental interest for political ethics. I'm very happy to have been invited to say something about the relevance of Kant's political ethics for Indonesia now at this seminar. From Kant, as we heard from Professor Lutz-Bachmann, we get two principles of political ethics. The first is his principle of peace through law. The second is his categorical imperative. Peace through law means in a republican state, thus in a democracy, people will easily obey the law under the condition that there's a clear moral commitment by the state to always act on the basis of the law. In other words, the state must be a Rechtsstaat, negara hukum. The second principle in Kant's categorical imperative is Kant's categorical imperative in his third form, act so that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of another, always as an end and never as a means only. Thus, a human person must never be treated only as a means for some end, but always as an end in itself. It is this principle that underlies the idea of human rights. Thus, I ask, are these two central principles of Kant's political ethics relevant for Indonesia? After Reformasi, Indonesia did something enormous. It put human rights and democracy into the constitution and declared that Indonesia was a negara hukum Rechtsstaat. In other words, at Reformasi, Indonesia fulfilled the conditions Kant named for internal peace. Thus has, after more than 50 years, what was demanded by Kant finally became a reality in Indonesia. But now, 25 years after Reformasi, Indonesia's democracy is in serious troubles. We have just had the probably worst elections in the history of Indonesia. People say that our democracy is decaying into an authoritarian oligarchy. To try to understand why our democracy still is in troubles, I want to go back to 1945. There were 2 points our founding fathers assembled in the BPUPKI couldn't overcome their differences: democracy and human rights. Individual human rights and democracy, with its one person, one vote, for them smelled of Western individualism. In his famous speech of May 31, Supomo had already declared that the concept of individual human rights smacked of liberalism and individualism and was incompatible with what he called Indonesian collectivism. We would better say Indonesian sense of community. While Sukarno famously declared, we planned in our constitution the sovereignty of the people and not the sovereignty of the individuum. Thus, there were no individual human rights put into the constitution, and instead of democracy, they put into Pancasila the almost untranslatable and even for Indonesians difficult to explain kerakyatan yang dipimpin oleh hikmat kebijaksanaan dalam permusyawaratan perwakilan, verbally, relatedness to the people led by the guidance of wisdom in common deliberation, representation. To understand where this resistance to the formulation of individual rights comes from, let us have a look at traditional Indonesian culture. I choose the Javanese culture, the cultural background of 40% of all Indonesians, the culture Supomo had referred to. For the Javanese, their well-being depends on harmonious relations with the 3 dimensions of their existence: society, nature, and the supernatural, alam gaib. Disturbances in one dimension will be reflected in disturbances in the other 2 dimensions. Therefore, for the Javanese, the central ethical value is rukun, living together in harmony. Insisting on one's own ideas and rights is easily regarded as a sign of pamrich, of lack of ethical maturity. One should be prepared, ikhlas, to propose one's own aspirations in favor of what the community does. Thus, rukun, harmony, is the central value of Javanese ethics. The moral ambiguity of ethics of harmony lies in the danger that in the name of harmony, injustice could be justified as common interests or by pressure to preserve unity. It is the same danger that is inherent in utilitarian ethics. Here, Kant's categorical imperative becomes the prick to stir Javanese ethics out of any too easy acquiescence with harmony above all. Harmony, yes, but never at the cost of enduring the human dignity of a single person. We come to a similar conclusion if we look at the Javanese conception of power. In Javanese tradition, political power is not just a relationship between persons, but essentially participation in the invisible, continually creative, divine energy that permeates the cosmos. A ruler is a person capable of sucking the numinous energy of the cosmos into himself, so that whatever happens in his realm happens through him. Nothing, so to say, moves if not through the ruler. From the ruler, peace and prosperity stream outwards across the land because he concentrates and directs all available energy. The implications of this conception of power are obvious there. Power is something physically real, but of numinous quality. It is strictly personal in the sense that it's connected to the person of the ruler. The power is absolute. He did not receive it from the people. He owes them nothing. The ruler is under no obligation to render account of how he uses his power, or better, how power works through him. The ruler is not bound by any law. The opposite, the law is an outflow of his power. But this does not mean that the ruler can do anything. In Javanese perspective, power is not something neutral, as in the Western view, where you can use power for good and bad ends. Power is intrinsically positive. The proof of the genuineness of power of a ruler is the prosperity, peace, and satisfaction of his people. The ruler does not lose his power because of external causes, but because he loses the ability to concentrate divine energy within himself. This happens when he begins to exploit his people and behave in a tyrannical manner. Thus, when he abuses his power for his personal pleasure. Exploiting his people would mean that he has lost the essential perspective that the source of his power lies in his own center, not somewhere outside. People will interpret such behavior of the ruler as a sign that his time is up. But things are not that simple. In the Javanese shadow play, the Wayang, the great noble heroes Arjuna, Varkudoro, Romo get their power through meditation. But so does Rahwana, the personification of evil, who in the end brings destruction upon his subjects. Thus, power and meditation are not in themselves positive. Actually, up to these days, people do meditate in order to become powerful. Thus, Javanese know quite well that power can be evil. But the Javanese understanding of power is still more sophisticated. In every wayang performance, there's a Goro-Goro scene, which begins at about 1 o'clock in the morning. In the midst of great commotion, with the hero of the play of Najuno at the center, 4 strange figures appear on the stage, completely relaxed, entertaining themselves with all kinds of pranks, oblivious to the mounting tensions of the play. They are the Punokawan, Semar, Gareng, Petruk, Bagong. The Punokawan are the faithful servants of the respective hero of the story, folksy people who speak a coarse Javanese and are masters in mixing gestures of highest feudal respect with obvious derision. The point that all Javanese already know is that without the assistance of the Punokawan, Arjuna and the other heroes cannot succeed. Only if led by Samar, the noble knights can fulfill their mission. The nobility of the Pandava shows in the fact that they always respect the Punokawan and listen to their counsel. It is difficult not to call the appearance of the Punokawan subversive. All the plays of the wayang extol the supernatural power and the refinement of the noble knights. But everybody knows that without the Punokawan, they will never succeed. Thus the Javanese know all along that the Punokawans, the supposed invincibility of their beloved heroes isn't that impressive. If the Punokawan are not around, they get lost and lose. The Pandava always treat the Punokawan with respect and love. Their evil enemies, the Kurobo, also have the Punokawans, Togok and Saraito. But they never listen to their advice and in consequence always lose. This means that the way the lords behave to the Punokawans shows their moral quality. The Pandava are the good and noble one because they treat their servants in a good and noble way. And the Kurova are the bad ones because they treat their Punokawan badly. The Pandava win in the end because they behave morally, and the Kurova lose because they are the evil one. And the Punokawan are from the people. Thus, ethics do count for the Javanese in judging the lords. The moral quality of their rulers is decisive for judging them. Therefore, the ideology of the god king or the man with superhuman legitimacy, who therefore stands above being judged on normal terms, is not completely stomached by the Javanese. The wayang story shows that the whole idea of supernatural power does not really work out. It is the protection of the Punokawan that assures victory for the strong and not their supernatural strength. And it shows that morality is the decisive point of view in judging rulers and heroes. It is obvious that a traditional Javanese understanding of power needs time to get used to Kant's peace through law, the sovereignty of the law. For the Javanese, not the law, but the power holder is the point of reference. does the king or the sultan. While on the village level, Javanese were very familiar with common deliberation and common, let us say, democratic decision-making. But both obedience to the king and village deliberation and decision-making are person-related. And the law is relative to what it achieves. If a decision outside the law would promise a better result, then be it. Therefore, the conviction that everything can be arranged, apapun bisa diatur, is deeply rooted in traditional personalized ethics. This is precisely this kind of pragmatism which lies behind the decay of our post-Reformasi democracy. Pragmatism means that what is regarded as conducive to achieving policy goals is determined by the decision makers. Pragmatism means that the powerful politicians and capital owners get what they regard as just, and this need not be what is objectively just. Therefore, Kant's first condition is crucial: a clear moral commitment by the political leadership to obeying the law on principle. If the law is no longer conducive to solving the problems of the nation, it can and should be democratically changed. But as long as it is valid, it has to be obeyed. It seems clear that Kant's political ethics could kickstart a learning process that could be crucial for the success of Indonesian democracy. From Kant, Indonesia could learn to take her own identity as negara hukum, as Rechtsstaat, seriously. Now let us take a second look at Javanese ethics. Yes, Javanese ethics are ethics of harmony. Not my interests, but peace and harmony of the community should always be given priority. But how do Javanese learn not to put their personal interests in first place? In the bosom of their family, they learn that attitudes like being pamrih, free of selfishness, ramengkawe, vigorous in fulfilling one's duties, and nrimo, accepting all that happens to oneself in a calm way, are rewarding in themselves because they give inner freedom, the ability to what they call rilo and ikhlas, inner willingness to let go of something if it is necessary. Ailing, remember where I come from and where I shall go. Prachoyo, trust, trustno, love, teman, to be honest, adil, to be just. That they should behave in a noble way, budi luhur, and care for others, ngemong. Javanese experience these non-egoistical attitudes as deeply rewarding. The readiness to put the unity of the community first is nothing heteronomous. It comes from the heart. Thus, the prick of Kant's categorical imperative would not be to introduce some new ethics, but to open the awareness that in a modern, moving, changing world, a person can only be protected from being utilized, something the Javanese abhor, by explicitly stating that a person never should be regarded only as a means to something. The same holds for the Javanese perception of power. There's an element in the Javanese way of looking at politics that should become a strong bridge between the traditional feudal perception of power and the republican attitude. This element is in the Javanese conviction we saw expressed so clearly by the Punokawan that power should be wielded in a moral way. And this moral way shows, among others, in the respect the rulers show towards common people. This respect is rooted in a deep conviction that the power of the ruler is, on last account, rooted in the protection and love of his people. All these attitudes are genuinely moral. And this is the point. They are not intrinsically bound up to values like harmony, although they support them. In the name of these attitudes, the Javanese individual, precisely because he or she does really care and really is not willing to do something that is unjust, will have to take a stand even against the group if this is demanded by the situation. Thus, intrinsically, Javanese morals are open to moral courage, honesty, and taking a stand against the community in the name of justice. Javanese do not have to stop being Javanese in order to make the Kantian respect for human dignity a cornerstone in their moral convictions. Let us take a further step. In my opinion, there's a blind spot in Kant's reasoning, and Javanese ethics can help to overcome it. Kant's whole moral philosophy proceeds from his insight that there's only one thing that is good in itself, goodwill. And goodwill shows by always acting according to the categorical imperative to act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should be a universal law. But what if somebody counters, why should I care? Certainly nobody has ever acted morally only because she thought that her maxim would be made a universal law. Kant actually gives an answer, although in a strangely casual way, as if not sure how to place it within his system, in his critique of practical reason, not in the main body of his treatise, but in note 4, 5, and 6, where he names the fact of reason, Faktum der Vernunft, that cannot be denied. Thus, that we should always act in a moral way. That's all. All our famous considerations are about concept. All Kant's famous considerations are about concepts of the will against inclination, maxims of what is good, humans as rational natures of general legislation, and so forth. The result is a thin broth of ethics of duties where people act because of respect for the law and not because of inclinations. Love as a motivation for choosing the morally right, God bewares. In the end, Kant's moral philosophy, his theory about the moral act as developed in his groundwork, does not much more than give the criteria for recognizing which maxims are morally acceptable and which are not. Javanese ethics, on the opposite, are centered on goodness, while duty plays only a subordinate part. But goodness not in an abstract way, but realized in concrete way through a rich array of moral attitudes that are the signs of a morally mature person, of a person we would trust in, thus of a good person. Whether it is the readiness to let go of one's narrow egoistical interests, or the attitude of faithfully doing one's duties, the readiness to leave to one's opponent a chance for a new beginning, tego larane nanging orati ko patine, or the readiness to contribute to positive atmosphere of the community. All these attitudes include an awareness that it is by trying to be good that one becomes a noble person. Javanese believe that by developing such attitudes, they develop and mature their own identities, an identity which in Javanese eyes has a depth dimension, the deep realization of unity with God, Manungaling Kavalogusti, the unity of servant and Lord, not by appealing to the law of reason and the duty of rational beings, but by showing how learning to behave morally helps a person to grow, to become his or her own Lord, to experience inner peace and a growing positive relation to others, to experience life as more and more meaningful. Let me conclude. Yes, Indonesian politics can learn something extremely important from Kant if we want to rescue our democracy. We still must learn that democracy can only succeed when the law is obeyed on principle, always without question. There's no easy going on the negara hukum, on the Rechtsstaat, and no backsliding on human rights. Kant's categorical imperative makes instrumentalizing human beings the absolute immoral thing. Let us not gamble away what we have won. That's to say it in Japanese English, thank you, Immanuel. In Batak Indonesian, thank you, Opung. Thank you.
Very much from all of this. Give another one of applause. Those was two speakers talking about how we can implement thoughts on politics globally and also locally. Let me conclude a little bit. So previously from Professor Lutz-Bachmann, he points out the peaceful law that Immanuel has in his thoughts. I think it was very interesting that when he reminds us that Immanuel Kant is saying, no, humans should be treated as instruments by others. And whoever has that power of decision making as an actors, they should not be a violators, which I think towards what happened around us lately, it might be an irony. And then also peace is necessary and possible through law. And I think what Professor Lutz-Bachmann mentioned at the end of his presentation was also very important, whether which we need institutions which are able to bring up the idea of peace and has more responsible rather than the one that we have right now, especially in providing the mechanism of bringing peace towards people and bringing that human rights of people to have the peace in their life. As from Romo Magnis, so democracy is still in trouble. Yes, Romo. And I think from what Romo Magnis has presented earlier to us with the analogy of Japanese culture, that kind of proven that, again, you're more Japanese than I am, actually. So with the examples of the wayang or the shadow puppet, we can see that the winner is actually the good one, the punakawan, and the one who are lost are the evil. which actually points out whether in Japanese culture itself, we do have that realization of the powerful one should be the good one, and the evil should not win the powerful position itself. But now, I think in Japanese culture, we know that according to Prof. Romo Magnis' presentation earlier, that the power holder is the one. It used to be the king, but probably in a more relevant situation, it might be the capital holder or the political leader itself. And then in Japanese ethic itself, earlier Romo Magnis mentioned that it is a non-egoistic system of power of law and political implementation. And then power should be wielded in a moral way. And I think what I learned from Romo Magnis' presentation earlier is that the thoughts of Kant and also the Japanese ethics can go hand in hand, and even there, they also, complete one another itself. So to rescue democracy, we do need to implement the thoughts of Immanuel Kant without leaving our own identity as Indonesian. I think that's what I can conclude from both speakers. Now, any questions that I think we can start discussions. So we are inviting questions to Professor Lutz-Bachmann and also Romo Magnis. We have two here, yes.
Yes. Thank you. My name is Rio. I like to visit this kind of events. So I have two questions. First for Professor Lutz-Bachmann. The late Professor Johann Galtung, the father of peace studies, separates the peace into positive and negative peace. Most of the time, the enforced law that you are talking about, the law of peace, are only effectively a negative peace. So peace that is like any violence, but it's not a a comprehensive peace. So other than that, considering Kant's emphasis on individual autonomy, I think it was Max Weber who asserts that it's constrained by cultural, normative, and legal forces, including in this case in negative peace, or if it's the law itself is not upholding the that doesn't really upholding the peace. So how one can reconcile these two perspectives on the assertion of individual autonomy and what influences it? And one more is for Professor Magnis. How does Kant categorical imperative and the concept of moral duty inform the role of being a critic, so to say, become the opposition to the ruling government, to keep, let's say, keep the government in check, to be rational? It is a very Kantian way to say that, to be a rational government. Yet, if I'm not misunderstood your lecture, the Japanese norm is to keep it harmonious. So, is it necessarily contradictory between being a critic, being an opposition, but also keeping in a harmony? That's it. Thank you.
So I think let's just answer the question before going to the next question. Yeah, thank you very much, Rio. Is it? Okay, the first two questions for Professor Lutz-Bachmann. Can we have him on screen?
Thank you for your wonderful question. You are pointing at a very decisive aspect in Kant's theory I was talking about as a necessary but not so far complete and sufficient theory or moral and legal theory for peace. But you made it quite clear in your question. Kant's idea of negative peace is formally well described. You have to be obedient to an institute of law, public law, and finally coercion system of law in order to avoid that you or others become violent in executing your or others their interests in the public. And this negative order, law as a hindrance to freedom or autonomy, is a formally negative institute. But in the case of international order, you need something like a positive will to restrict yourself as a state to means of peaceful cooperative acting instead of preserving your interests, even including military power and similar tactics. This implies, even under conditions of legal public order, and even if the legal public order might be binding, and in that sense, very strict, you need the goodwill, as Father Magnis-Suseno pointed out, the goodwill to do peaceful acting. Peaceful acting is much more than not to apply military force, but you have to look out what I wanted to explain by the words of culture, of understanding, of forgiveness, of ways of mutual solutions, but binding solutions, not morally binding alone, but legally binding by public procedures. And insofar, the freedom is not the only basic right, it is equality and solidarity as well. This is somehow implied in Kant. I would say the Rechtsstaat, the public order in the world, is a precondition, but not fulfillment for peaceful consolation. And it is complete only if law is added or completed or fulfilled by moral orientation, and in Kant's terminology is that Tugendhandeln, acting according to the moral virtues. In the last part of the Metaphysics of Morals, you find that. It is not a formalist ethics in Kant. There is a Tugend orientation, the virtue orientation as well, to be seen in his full developed moral theory. And that has consequences for the politics as well. Politicians have to be morally in their intention and in their practice. That means not only avoid crimes against the law, not only avoid violence, but being oriented toward others in a way of recognition, of trust building, and that implies much more institutions than just political or legal ones. And I would say the culture of religions worldwide may be a good example of better understanding each other and learning from each other in a way to fulfill the Kantian hope for eternal peace worldwide. I hope this was partly an answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lutz-Bachmann. Thank you. And Romo Magnis, go ahead.
My English is very bad. Never learned English really, but well, you have to do it. I think the important thing is, of course, harmony is still a big value also politically, but we have to insist that the law is obeyed. One of the criticism about the preparations of the election was that there happened things that were against the law. That is important for our democracy, that we really keep that our politicians obey the law, and we should never allow, never retreat on human rights. Let us say the important thing, which were already in 1944 and 45, it was then not possible to put into the constitution the human rights of free speech. Hatta and Muhammad Yamin wanted it, but Sukarno and Supomo rejected it. Now we have human rights in our 28th paragraph, and let us say a law like the ITE law, it makes it now possible to bring you in difficulties if you criticize. The same is if you have no opposition. Big harmony. If we get a big government, I once heard the word we get Bima. I'm not so sure what it means. But for instance, all parties support the government. Who will be able to say something for people like on Rempang? This is a very dangerous situation. We really have to learn from Kant not to look down at harmony. Harmony is very important. That we have in Indonesia since more than 20 years, no bloody conflicts, that you can go from Sabang to Merauke without difficulties. To Merauke, yes, to Duga belum, to Duga not yet. This is something great. This huge country is in many respects okay. If we listen to Kant, obey the law and human rights, then we have a very good prospect for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Romo. And I think the second question, we have the gentleman right over there.
Yes. Okay, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Montesquieu.
Can you speak up a little bit, please?
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Stephen Montesquieu. I am an international relations student. I have how many is maximal question?
Sorry?
Actually, I have 3 questions.
We have 15 more minutes, so let's give other participants some chances. Yes.
Actually, my question, most of my question is referring to about Immanuel Kant himself. So I read many sources that say Immanuel Kant is one of the modern philosophers. Do you agree that about the statement? So the second is the famous work of Immanuel Kant is Critique of Pure Reason. What it makes famous? Is it influence maybe international lawmakers or what else? So my last question is to Prof. Magnis. Hello, Prof. What is ethics according to Immanuel Kant? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Stephen, is it? Yes, okay. So the first two questions is for Professor Lutz-Bachmann. Is that correct, Stephen? Yes, okay. So Professor Lutz-Bachmann, so Stephen was asking about how do you have the agreement of Immanuel Kant as a modern philosopher? And then the next one is, what do you think makes the Critique of Pure Reasons famous? What kind of influence does it have in the world of philosophy? Please, Professor Lutz-Bachmann.
Thank you very much for your excellent questions. I couldn't understand acoustically correctly the first question, but let me start with the second one. The importance of Kant is not only based on his critique of pure theoretical reason, but of course, Kant himself said that the most important part of his philosophy is not only the critique of practical reason, but of his moral philosophy in the groundwork and in the metaphysics of morals. So this is Kant's own judgment, but the theory of pure or critique of pure theoretical reason is giving the whole concept of philosophy the epistemological background, namely asking and answering the question, what is reasoning about? What are the limits and the specifics of human reasoning? He distinguished ratio and reason, rational thinking, discursive thinking from speculative thinking, and without the reference to what he called the ideas of reason, there would be no metaphysics on morals possible, and from the metaphysics of morals, he draws his conclusions to the theory of politics. So this is a mediated concept of politics prepared in an epistemological first step in the critique of pure theoretical reason, and concluded in the second step of a theory of metaphysics of morals. And metaphysics means a coherent system of ideas, necessary ideas produced by reason itself, as a reality of itself, namely a moral reality of unconditioned postulates. We have not to follow necessarily the whole transcendental philosophical argumentation of Kant in order to understand how important the political philosophy is. And we today see many, many philosophers referring to that part of Kant without fully affirming the fundaments in the two critiques of pure theoretical reason as well as a critique of practical reason. So this is somehow an information or an answer, argumentation from an inner philosophical reflection of the systematics in Kant's own philosophy. And I would add a last commentary. Father Magnis-Suseno and I are following a similar perspective on Kant's philosophy, namely to integrate, I say it in terms of history of ideas, to integrate ideas of justice and morality from a tradition worked out in Thomas Aquinas, but not contradicting Kant, and so opening Kant's philosophy to a broader understanding of all, of the good, of justice, and of just political acting towards peace. And this is something important in a year when we memorize not only Kant's 300th birthday, but as well the 800th birthday year of Thomas Aquinas.
I think that's it, Professor Lutz-Bachmann. Thank you very much. So probably now we can move on to Roma Magnis ethics according to Kant.
Yeah. I can directly connect with Professor Lutz-Bachmann. What is ethics? Ethics is our ongoing reflection about one of the most fundamental facts of our existence, of our conscious, that we know that we always should act in a good and not in an evil way, in a just and not in an unjust way, that we should have integrity, thus that we should be moral beings. Ethics reflects of this. If we talk about ethics in politics, it is the same. We ask how to make sure that we do good and not evil, just and not unjust politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Romo. I think we have a lady over here. Yeah, that was you. The one with the black cardigan and glasses. Miss, can you please raise your hand so we can give the microphone? Yeah, there it is. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kay. I'm currently studying information systems at University of Indonesia. And thank you, Mbak Daru, as well as Professor Magnis and Professor Lutz-Bachmann for the lecture. I would like to ask, with Indonesia's variety in religion as well as culture, if we look at Kantian thoughts, how can we instill order and honor in the constitution, in the parliament, and how can we ensure that they are morally inclined in their intention and practice? And yeah, how do we avoid moral ambiguity in the government? Essentially, is what I'm asking, and I would like to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kay. So probably, I'm sorry, Kay, the second one, how do we avoid? Oh yeah, thank you, moral ambiguity. So probably from Professor Lutz-Bachmann first, how do we instill order and honor in constitution and parliament? And also how do we avoid moral ambiguity, Professor Lutz-Bachmann?
We can avoid the ambiguities you have spoken about in two different ways, according to Kant. First way is be as an individual morally obedient to what he calls the insight of reason in all of us into the moral postulates, especially the law of morality, which is in our conscience present. And secondly, Kant see in his writing on religion, a text I didn't mention in my statement, but important, that comes importantly here into the game. It is not possible to overcome what he calls in German den Hang zum Bösen, the tendency of each individual to become evil, not only in acting, but already in thinking. And this is something he hopes to overcome, a situation of humans, contingency of human acting. He wants to overcome that not by legal orders or public structures, but by the publicity of morally acting people, building up a group of morally acting people in the public. This is an idea you can find in the third and fourth part of his writings on religion. And here, religion indeed comes into the game, which is present in the title of the conference. Truthful religious communities are defined in Kant's view as morally oriented, believing not in violence, but in the power of moral correctness. And that in order to enable each of and all of us and each of us to act in reality morally, we need communities in public of moral acting humans and religious communities. He's even talking about the church, not in a Christian sense, but in an open sense of for all moral-oriented communities, may help to overcome the ambiguities you have been talking about. This is, I think, a Kantian answer present in his texts for your important question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Lutz-Bachmann. So, Romo Magnis, how do we instill order and honor in constitution and parliament? How do we instill order and honor in constitution and parliament? Instill, implement order.
Our constitution. Well, we have our constitution. I think the constitution is maybe not perfect, but this is quite good. Our constitution does, in my opinion, there are no serious moral questions about our constitutions. Our politicians should act always on the basis of the constitution. And of course, they should also have an understanding what Panchasila means. Because Panchasila is not just some 5 points, it is of the highest importance that we with many religious identities live in peace together, that you behave in a human and civilized way, which means respect human rights. That the unity of Indonesia means the state is a state of us, that we don't leave people behind, democracy and social justice. This should be always in the perspective of all politicians. Only this I can say. Thank you.
Thank you, Romo Magnis. Probably we can have one more questions from the audience. I think the guy in the middle raised his hand first. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Hireka Eric.
Who? Sorry?
Hireka Eric.
Ireka.
Yeah. Thank you for Professor Magnis-Suseno for pointing out the fact that Indonesian concept of democracy is not solely based on the value of individual liberty, but also the fact that it requires a kind of social harmony. So my question is, when we finally have the duty to teach citizenship values to the younger generations, how do we teach the value of freedom and liberty? Is it always freedom and liberty in the context of Indonesia? Is it necessary that we always have to cite or quote the value of social harmony into the concept of individual liberty so that it fits the the narrative of Pancasila, especially the fourth principle of Pancasila?
Thank you very much. Romo, go ahead.
I think the key points are human rights. And this is the point we had to learn. As I explained in my speech, it took very long until finally human rights were by reformasi put in our constitution. Human rights mean, as Kant demands, that a person never be used also as a means. Now, there's one important point which, for instance, in the discussions of 1944 could not yet be really realized, but after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948, it is different. Human rights are not only freedom rights, but also social rights, which we have in Pancasila, the fifth, maybe also in the third sila, that, let us say, we will not advance if others are being left behind. We will not develop if there are some of us that are not developing. And in this sense, freedom and togetherness in social responsibility is actually very well already in our constitution. We have to make it realized that we should not go back on the idea that because of collectivism or something like that, individual human rights are not important. We have to take both together. In nobody, or let us say everybody, should be sure that he or she will be respected in her or his dignity, but we are responsible that also others can live according to their human dignity.
Thank you very much. Okay, I promise this is going to be the last question. I would like to give the chance to the lady right over here.
Thank you. Actually, I wanted to ask Professor Lutz-Bachmann as well regarding the coercive phase of universal law. My name is Yesi, but I don't want to take anybody's time, so I just want to ask a lighter question to Romo. Romo, you mentioned a bit about love of God. So on the categorical imperative, I have a question. I have a burning question. What if our act is not solely that we don't just treat people as a means to an end, but we do it because we fear God. So we don't do it as an act in itself, but out of fear, because in many religions, especially, we are taught to fear God. So what if we do it out of fear? Can we still call it categorical imperative? All that would be fall out of the Kantian categorical imperative. Thank you.
Did you watch Siksa Kubur or something?
I mean, this is, in my opinion, we could be afraid of God in the sense there are many reasons to be ashamed in front of God. For instance, if we die, we'll realize that there are many in our lives, many things we would like to put below the carpet and before God, not, but really afraid not, because God loves it. God is Rahmat. Then and Rahma is grace. We do not have to be afraid of God. He doesn't want to punish us. Maybe we have to punish ourselves, but of course, when we meet God, we will be ashamed, but it is the way a child is ashamed if it has done something nakal and meets his loving mother. In this sense, we should see in God a loving mother. And then I think the question of loving or being afraid dissolves itself. We should be thankful to God.
Thank you very much, Magnis. So, to conclude the topic that we have tonight on law, politics, and religion, Professor Lutz-Bachmann points forward that the law of peace is totally necessary. And yes, we can implement the law of peace itself. And by the presentation that Romo Magnis also added, I think pragmatically, we have to agree that politicians should obey the law and no violation against the human right. And also, especially in Indonesian environment, we should not look down to harmony because that's how we live in Indonesia itself. And we have to remember our own philosophical point, which is the Pancasila. And hopefully by implementing those ideas from the two speakers that we have tonight, we can reach the universal goal, which is the ideal society that Immanuel Kant in his thought. Thank you very much for Professor Lutz-Bachmann, and thank you, Romo Magnis-Suseno. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Also, this is the background. So everyone is like, what? Is it me and Romo? Oh, okay. Okay, cool. So this is the background. Yes. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.